Houston, Texas, December 1992. 8 members of the Houston UFO Network separately report being abducted in one of the strangest mass abduction cases in history. Daryl Sims, a former U.S. intelligence operative, conducts the preliminary investigation.
All these people independent of each other, and to my shock and amazement, they all came back with the exact same story, the same craft, the same entities. They identified each other in great detail. Some of them didn't even know each other very well. All of these people described being taken by a small craft and a small entity, and the entity took them to a much larger craft.
After researching numerous UFO sightings that were reported the night of the incident, Sims makes a shocking discovery.
Someone in Japan had filmed the moon during this time and filmed a massive craft that left a shadow across the moon as it crossed the moon's surface during the same time of the mass abduction. So there was the corroboration that we needed.
UFO researchers following the case believe collective details gathered from the event may shed new light on the abduction phenomena and perhaps clues to understanding the extraterrestrial agenda.
One of the people taken saw a map-like thing on the wall. The map that this individual saw that was on the wall indicated approximately 6,000 years of the aliens' involvement with mankind. We were down to the last small section of that map, which was about 100 years left. What we deduced from the information from the abductee was simply that this experiment, whatever it is almost over.
After viewing the map, one of the abductees was led through a massive hallway to another part of the craft.
It was a huge room of enormous size. I said, "What did you see?" He said, "It looked like a collection, almost like a museum of things that had been collected." They seemed to have collected species, animals, people, all kinds of things. And I said, "And what was significant about that?" And he said, "I don't think they were dead. I think they were all suspended animation." This may explain the reason why some people disappear and don't come back from an abduction event.
Do the accounts from the Houston mass abduction event shed new light on the extraterrestrial agenda? If so, might the stories of mass disappearances throughout history be not fantasy, but part of a program to collect human beings and other Earth species? But for what purpose?
Perhaps these abductions are not happening for some random reason. These samples are being taken so that the human seed itself can be preserved in the unlikely event of some mass ecological catastrophe that wipes out human life on Earth as we now know it.
The evolution of humans on this planet has been completely and totally an experiment on the part of extraterrestrials. We'll call it experimental lab process on this planet. Intelligences are cloning and hybridizing and mixing and matching.
Earth could very well be a farm. Simple as that. It's like the island of Dr. Moreau, where we're genetically altered, we're mixed, we're abducted, we're taken, we're brought back. This could be the greatest melting pot of experimental work in the universe. But, you know, as NASA has said, they're going to discover alien life forms in 20 years. I think we will find that creatures on other worlds resemble us very closely.
The United States officially declared its independence from Great Britain in 1776, And just 14 years later, a report of the first UFO sighting in American history appeared in the newly published journals of John Winthrop, the second governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. His journals, which are now known as A History of New England, 1630 to 1649, are still considered the preeminent record for that period in American history. When the journals were finally published in 1790, over 140 years after Winthrop's death, they were found to contain an alarming account of a possible close encounter over Boston's Muddy River.
One night in March of 1639, James Everell, who was described as being a sober and discreet man, and two of his companions boarded a little boat in the Muddy River of Boston. As they paddled along the river, they saw a great bright light that hovered in the sky. As they watched, the light flared up and then contracted into what they described as the figure of a swine. It's difficult to imagine anybody seriously reporting a sighting of a glowing flying pig. Looking at the sighting, one can't help but wonder if they were struggling to describe an oval-shaped fuselage and four short, what we might now call landing struts or landing gear, in a way that made sense in the 17th century.
Winthrop's account states that the object moved swift as an arrow, jetting back and forth, as well as up and down, for 2 to 3 hours. And when it finally disappeared, the 3 passengers in the boat, who had been drifting downstream the entire time, were astonished to find themselves back at the point where they began their trip.
What Winthrop describes in his journal is really difficult to explain. Certainly, it seems hard to fathom that for 2 or 3 hours, 3 men in a boat watched a bright light moving around in the sky over the city of Boston. And it seems almost inconceivable that their boat could have been drawn back against the tide without them noticing it. These type of strange and inexplicable phenomena are now associated with the phenomena that's called alien abduction.
And as the abduction cases evolved, you heard people say, all of a sudden, everything around them was slowing way, way down. And they associate the slowing way, way down with whatever this event is that we call the human abduction syndrome.
Could this event at Muddy River be not only North America's first documented UFO sighting, but also the first account of an alien abduction? Those who believe the account in Winthrop's journals was an actual alien encounter point to the last line of his report, which states, "Other credible persons saw the same light." By the time Winthrop's history was published in 1790, the debate over the possibility of extraterrestrial life was more heated than ever before. In fact, the question of whether life existed on other planets had become so hotly contested, it caused one of America's founding fathers, Thomas Paine, to be unofficially exiled to Europe.
Thomas Paine enters the extraterrestrial life debate in a very dramatic way. He was an Englishman, but famous American patriot. 1793, Thomas Paine publishes a book called The Age of Reason. And in The Age of Reason, he makes one of the most vigorous attacks on Christianity ever made. The bottom line on it is, he says you must believe in extraterrestrials. If you know any modern astronomy, the idea of God made the entire universe going from planet to planet, redeeming people, is just impossible to believe. That creates a sensation. Thousands of copies of the book were sold.
In December of 1793, Thomas Paine was arrested in France as a result of supporting a political party that was no longer in power. When the American ambassador refused to speak on his behalf, Paine believed that George Washington had abandoned him because of his writings supporting the idea of extraterrestrial life and refuting traditional Christianity. In 1802, he was invited back to America by the third president, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, an intellectual, was considered a genius by many in his time, both for his skill as a statesman and his scientific aptitude. And some believe he was also a proponent, like his contemporaries Ben Franklin and John Adams, in the concept of the plurality of worlds.
The concept of a plurality of worlds was a very widely accepted concept in the 18th century. People like John Adams and Thomas Paine didn't view extraterrestrial life as a possibility, but rather as a matter of fact that everybody knew to be true.
Roswell, New Mexico, July 3rd, 1947. A flash of light streaks across the sky and crashes in the desert near the Roswell Army Airfield. Rancher Mac Brazel hears the impact and investigates the next morning. He reports what he finds to authorities.
The field of debris was like nothing ever seen before. And the rancher reported finding what looked like initially foil-like material that when it was scooped up and collected, it had these strange properties like memory metal. In other words, it would resume its original shape when it was crumpled up, if you like. This sort of suggested the possibility that something very strange had come down at Roswell.
And they find 5 alien bodies. Alien because they do not look human. Using hermetically sealed, smaller coffin-sized boxes, these bodies were transported and looked at, medically analyzed, and then shipped off to various areas of classified research.
They're described as the classical gray, 3.5, 4 feet tall, black wraparound eyes, slits for a mouth, long arms, depending on which description, between 3 and 5 fingers.
At first, U.S. military personnel announced that they had recovered debris from an unknown spacecraft. But later, they reversed themselves.
Because 24 hours later, the military completely changed its story and said, sorry, we made a big mistake, it was just a weather balloon. But of course, no statement was made as to how trained military personnel couldn't tell the difference between a flying saucer and a weather balloon.
But why did the military change their story? Was it because they found something else, something otherworldly, as ancient astronaut theorists believe?
People who claim to have been associated with the crash at Roswell claim that there were several alien bodies recovered. It's very strange that they would talk about beings. We also know that the mortician was called and that they were asked to come up with small little caskets. Something obviously happened at Roswell. What was it exactly? We really don't know, but I think it was out of this world.
This is kind of the core of the Roswell legend. Our government, which is in a democracy supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people, is covering this up. The second thing that is implicit in this legend is, of course, that extraterrestrials have been visiting the Earth.
But if alien beings did in fact crash at Roswell, who are they? And what do they want? September 19th, 1961. According to news accounts, Betty and Barney Hill were driving through New Hampshire late at night when a large flying saucer rapidly approached them and then hovered over their car. they saw strange figures through the windows of the craft. And mysteriously, the couple also reported complete memory loss of the 2 hours immediately following the encounter.
No one really knows to this day what Betty and Barney Hill saw. However, the details of their case do reflect on various other versions of alien abduction. I say alien abduction because some of the pieces of information that they discuss, the loss of time, seeing beings that actually came out of this craft and associated and interacted with them, and they weren't human.
Ultimately, under hypnosis, they recall being brought out of the car and taken aboard the ship, that it was a legitimate abduction, and that Betty pleaded with her captors, if you will, that not to harm her as she laid on this table and experiments were done on her, like a needle being inserted into her stomach. Barney relates a number of skin samples and sperm being taken from him.
The beings described by Betty and Barney Hill fit the classic case of a gray. Now, there are variations to size and dimensions of these beings, but they all seem to have the same characteristics. Slim, skindly bodies, large oval heads, large oversized eyes.
The Hills were the first documented case of an alien abduction in modern time. But it is not the last. Since the 1960s, there have been many more similar reports, including that of Kim Carlsberg, a commercial photographer, who in 1988 claimed to have been abducted by gray aliens in the middle of the night.
We were living on the beach in Pacific Palisades, and I walked up to the window and I saw this light on the horizon that I'd never seen before. You know, I'd lived on the beach my whole life, and it wasn't a boat and it wasn't a star. I just watched this craft. The next thing I knew, it jetted into the stars and disappeared, and I went to bed as usual. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was not in my bed any longer. I was naked and I was paralyzed. The beings I saw were about 3.5 feet tall. They were naked. They were off-white. They were not gray. They had huge heads, huge wrap-around black eyes, tiny little bodies.
There are many stories of grays abducting humans into their spaceships, and even of being inseminated with alien reproductive material and then conceiving human-alien hybrid babies and having those fetuses removed from their bodies and then grown on the alien spaceships. In some cases, people report going back onto the spaceship and being able to see these hybrid offspring.
I was being used for my DNA. They were creating hybrid children from my eggs, someone else's sperm, and combining it with their DNA and their sperm. I would be implanted with an alien fetus, and they would leave the fetus in my body for a few months. Then they would bring me back again later, and then they would remove it. It was horrific. It was terrifying.
You can't have so many people saying that they've been abducted and not have some possibility of truth with that. I think it's happening. I don't know if it's a hybridization program for these ETs or whether they're trying to bring these hybrids back to this planet one day when the environment changes. But in my opinion, something very strange is happening to these people who claim to be abducted.
Santa Monica, California, 2014. Here at X-Res Studio, visualization artists Greg Downing and Eric Hansen are pioneering the use of photogrammetry and special effects software to assist archaeologists in the global effort to decipher ancient cave art.
We use a combination of techniques from the fields of computational photography and graphics in order to help the archaeologists reveal information difficult to see just with basic vision when you're there.
The team recently traveled to the Grand Canyon to compile a massive, in-depth photographic compilation of the collection of strange petroglyphs known as the Shaman's Panel.
We were drawn to the panel for two primary aspects. One was the rich layering of the anthropomorphic figures, and two is the kind of evocative, surreal nature of their composition.
This cave is maybe like 5 or 6 feet deep. So by using a photogrammetric technique, we're able to get the detail across the entire painting.
The nice thing about this technique is we can separate the different dyes and minerals that are used. And in this case, now we can kind of see the layering expressed. We can see figures that are simply lost by the naked eye.
Yeah, that brings it out. Yeah, it's a complete difference.
Could modern techniques one day uncover even more details about what ancient people really saw and hope to communicate with rock art? Some ancient astronaut theorists believe one compelling clue that modern researchers might be on the right track can be found, oddly enough, in contemporary America. March 1945. Amazing Stories magazine publishes an article entitled, "I Remember Lemuria." But according to the author, this is the first piece to appear in the science fiction magazine that is not fiction at all, but an actual account of his own alien abduction.
Richard Shaver was a man who surfaced decades ago with a story of underground entities that were very hostile to the human race. Terrible creatures that would kidnap and kill members of the human race.
They were the first inhabitants of planet Earth. When the sun became radioactive, these people could no longer live on the surface. Some left in their spaceships, others went underground.
Could Richard Shaver's account of underground extraterrestrials abducting humans be true? Shaver proposed that the alien race that once populated the Earth had developed highly specialized equipment that allowed them to embed multifaceted imagery into stones.
Richard Shaver believed that he had made the greatest discovery in the history of mankind about the true nature of intelligent life on Earth. So this is an original Shaver photograph of a rock book. And this multi-dimensional way of making images in the rock books was something that Shaver saw as a real sign of the superior intelligence of the ancient races. And Shaver believed that these weren't mere rocks with random patterns, that these were actually deliberately manufactured artifacts by the ancient races who had been here 30,000, 100,000, who knows how many years ago.
Might Richard Shaver have actually discovered real physical evidence that extraterrestrials have been here on planet Earth and might still be here today?
Whether or not Richard Shaver's stories are true, it does dovetail with legends across this planet of a race of beings that either created humankind or were at least our ancestors that had a superior technology.
If we're looking for extraterrestrials, ironically, the heavens above might not be the best place to look. We should perhaps even be looking deep below our feet.
In some ways, exploring the underground cavern world of planet Earth is the final frontier.